So, as said, the first part of Module A will be A1. What is a regulatory impact assessment and why do you use it? Well, to be able to answer that question, first we want to know what is better regulation. That's something you hear quite often when we're doing better regulation. What is better than the old regulation? And why is it important? Well, regulatory impact assessments and their role in better regulation will be the third topic that we cover, because if you want to do better regulation, and impact assessment is really something that is crucial there. I'll tell you something about the features of a regulatory impact assessment, and we're going to look at assessment methods and quantification. But still, day one is a very theoretical day, so we're not going deep into the practices of calculation, only showing you the examples. And feel free to ask any question. I think that I just simply move a bit so I can see the screen a bit better. So, better regulation. Well, better regulation means foremost better governance for all regulatory stakeholders. As you can see, I've put some footnotes down. These are comments from Professor Claudio Radelli. He works at the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, and he's really an authority on research on RIA, impact assessment. I was trained by him in 2006 in England. It was part of my job to go to England and learn more about that system. And these are his statements, and I really believe that they are true. And the goal of better regulation is to increase the credibility of regulation by setting regulatory quality priorities. And credibility of regulation creates an important precondition for the legitimacy of the state. In countries with bad regulatory processes, people will not comply with the law. And then you get a system that doesn't work, you have no controlling mechanisms, the system is open for corruption, and of course you can imagine that it's not good for society as such, and very bad for businesses, very bad for economic growth. So the advice of Mr. Radelli would be to keep these principles of better regulation in mind whatever you do. And for a balanced opinion forming and decision making process, it's necessary to provide an insight into both the intended and the unintended effects. This to ensure evidence-based policymaking. Evidence-based policymaking really is the buzzword we're going to use in these coming 3 days. These, in the fourth bullet, you see intended and unintended effects. And why is that so important? If you want to solve a problem, and that's why you make regulation, because you want to protect the environment, or you want to protect workers, or you want to increase the level of social security, regulators always have a good cause at mind. Regulation always comes from a good heart. We want to improve the situation, we want to make a better society. But very often, if you do not do a good assessment, you will have unintended effects, side effects that you had not thought of beforehand, side effects that you could not have thought about if you had not consulted your stakeholders, if you would not have done consultation. And it's the unintended effects that are most damaging to the economy. Because people are always smarter than regulators. And the business people are very quickly smart. So if you make a law to say we want to prevent people from being fired very easily, and we want to have a more secure system of the labor market, but you say that people are allowed to have a temporary contract for 1 year, and after 1 year you cannot fire them anymore, because you want to protect the labor force. And you will see that employers will start firing people just before the end of that first year. And that's an unintended effect. So you want to protect people, but people are smarter than regulators, so they will turn that around and they will fire people before the end of the year. And that's something that, of course, we want to prevent too. So just a very, very simple example to show you that unintended effects can be very harmful for the cause that you want to attain. And of course, that again is bad for the legitimacy of the state and the credibility of regulation. Simple examples to show you that an impact assessment is very important. And evidence-based policy making means that you can only make decisions on the basis of scientifically, well, more or less scientific information. It has to have evidences. You cannot say we do this because we think or we have heard that this is the way to regulate and that these effects will or might not occur. I mean, figures talk. Assumptions are nothing. But if you have figures, some calculations or some scientific figures from people from university or government institutions, then you know that you're working with evidence. And we make evidence-based policy making only on real figures, on real assumptions, on real scientific assumptions. And that will be very important to have this better regulation at hand. So why is all this important? Well, about the unintended side effects I talked, they have negative influences. They have negative influences on acceptance of regulation, on the compliance rate. They have negative influences on economic growth, negative influences on safety of society, not only in the labor force, but also on in traffic, or in building constructions, or whatever, in schools. It discourages people to start a business. One of the problems in the Netherlands is that a lot of people do not want to start their own business because people prefer the security of a steady job in a big company or in government over putting themselves out there in the street and investing and taking risks and investing their own savings. And if you know that as a government, you should take away those impediments to start a business. Because as you see, Malaysia is, if I was well informed, on number 17 of the World Bank rating of doing business. The Netherlands are only on 27. And we're dropping one number every year. So it's very, very nice of you to invite me, but my country is dropping now. Of course we're doing very, very good things, that's no question about that. But if you want to make doing business your number one goal, and I've heard Malaysia that wants that, you should make sure that people want to start a business and make starting a business and doing business, and investing and training people as easy as possible. That only will give you good economic growth. And the side effects will also undermine people's confidence in the political system. People will not believe regulators and politicians anymore, and they will not comply with the law. And at first, of course, that has effects on the end users. It will have effect on the businesses that will get a fine by inspections because they did not comply with the law. But in the end, it will have political consequences. Ministers will be fired and governments will be overthrown or not re-elected. And that's why politicians who sometimes think that it's easy to keep the things the way they are, because reforms are always difficult and reforms are dangerous and reforms sometimes upset people, because everybody has, of course, an interest in the status quo, and everybody has interest. But in the end, if you see for the long future, if Malaysia wants to be a high-income country in 2020, you need to have these kind of reforms, and you know that work has to be done, and not doing it will have political consequences, but big political consequences in the end. So politicians should really be aware of that and know that they should work. Governments, and I'm not talking about Malaysia, but governments in general. In the 1960s and 1970s, governments started expanding and making more and more regulation, actually thinking that we could regulate the whole world and that we could create a risk-free society where everything goes well and nobody gets harmed. And governments started expanding and regulating everything and taking responsibility away from people, because we thought that at our desk we could, in the capital, in the administrative capital, we could design the whole world and that we would know that everything was going on and that we would do it for the best. And of course, those were good intentions. But in the 1980s, when the first economic, end of 70s and beginning of the 80s, when the first economic crises came on again, we saw that government is not always the answer to all the problems in the world, and that you should certainly not, and that's something we have learned over the last 20 years, should not take away the responsibility to the people dealing with the laws every day. People are smart enough to know what's good for them and their environment, so you should work together, of course. And that now means that we have started, and you can see that, well, in some slides I'll show you later. Over the last 30 years, you see that more and more people started doing regulatory impact assessments because they think that making policy from the design table, just thinking this is good and this will work for a country, that is not the answer. Impact assessment, getting all the information that you need and then work out a plan and consult it and have stakeholder involvement, that is the way forward, and you will see that more and more countries will do that. So that's why one reason that we should improve regulatory quality. Another reason, very practical, is that tight financial budgets present challenges for economic performance. As you know, Europe is in a very enormous economic crisis, and the budgets are getting smaller and smaller, and governments have less and less money, and that also gives us challenges. So instead of spending a lot of money by government, maybe we could rethink policy, and some things that the state have been doing over the last years might as well be done by the market, or be regulated in a different way, and I will talk about that much more tomorrow. But for instance, risk-based approaches to, let's say, public health in restaurants is one of the answers with tight fiscal budgets. You can send out inspectors to check on the quality of restaurants every year for 10 times. That means that you will never have enough time to visit all the restaurants in Malaysia, and you will never have enough time to do it every kitchen. But you could also say that we're going to do a risk-based approach, and that you look at the kitchens, and those restaurants that were a bit dodgy, that you're going to visit them more often, and those restaurants who have a good record because they're clean and nice and the quality of the food is good, that you will just skip them for a year. I'll tell you tomorrow why that is important and why that is doable, but you should have more attention to those areas that need attention, and the other areas that are already performing very well, you could maybe leave them for rest. And that, of course, in tight fiscal climate is an answer to some problems. Third one, regulatory systems play a central role in improving both the citizens' and investors' confidence. As said, if you have good regulation of high quality, that's clear, that's easy to comply with, people will have improved compliance rates, people will follow up the rules, and it gives, of course, that's why the people have confidence. Engaging in regulatory reform to improve regulatory quality has proven to be a highly effective option for economic development. Over the last 30 years, when RIA became more and more important, of course, a lot of studies have been done about RIA. I talk about Claudio Radelli, but there was also an initiative from the University of Berlin who did an evaluation on impact assessment, EVIA, and they have seen that it actually works. We have now some empirical data that regulatory reform and regulatory impact assessments really produce good outcomes, and that it has a contribution to economic growth. So that's